right, so we are live. So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are so excited to kick off a new year, a new decade with you guys, and highlight Epic Earth. So all month long, we are showcasing amazing places from around the world that most people will never get a chance to see, and showcasing some really fantastic habitats and the people that explore them. So right now, we've got 6 classes joining us from across North America. I'm going to give them a chance to say hi before we dive in. So first, we've got Miss Denica's grade 5s in Flemington in New Jersey. Hi, guys.
Hi. Hi.
Hey, welcome in. We've got Mr. Petrus's grade 4 through 8s in Whitney in Ontario. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, welcome in. We've got Miss DeMaio's grade 3s in Naugatuck in Connecticut. Hi, guys. They're setting the bar for enthusiasm so far. Okay, we've got Mr. Sinclair's grade 5s in San Jose in California. Hi, guys. Oh, there we are. Hey, everyone. We've got Miss Aitchison's grade 7/8s in New Liskeard in Ontario. Hi, guys. Oh, your mic's not working.
There we go.
There we go. Hey. Hey, you guys are so much lower pitched than everyone else. I love it. All right, and last but not least, joining us for the very first time, we've got Mr. Routson's grade 5s in Harrisonburg in Virginia. Let me just pull up their mic. Hey guys, welcome in. Hey, all right. Of course, the reason you guys are all joining us is for our speaker. So we are joined live in London in the UK by Dr. Diva Amon. So she is a Trinidadian deep sea biologist who studies what lives in our world's deep oceans and how the actions that we do affect those creatures and habitats. She's gone down in Submersibles. She's been featured on pretty much every media outlet you can possibly imagine with her fantastic outreach. She is currently at the London Natural History Museum, one of the most elite research facilities in the entire world, and she's the co-founder of the founder of the NGO nonprofit Species dedicated to marine conservation, science, and advocacy in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean in general. We are so thrilled to have her back, and so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Amon, and take it away.
Brilliant. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for tuning into this. It's going to be great. So before I begin, I want to see how many of you know a bit about the deep sea, because this isn't something that, you know, many people talk about, that we really get to engage with in an interesting way sometimes. Like, how many of us have been to the deep sea? Very few. So Jesse, you're gonna have to help me with this, but I want to ask you guys to tell me 4 things about the deep sea that you know about. If you were to go down there right now, what would it be like down there? 4 things.
4 things. So let's go to Mr. Sinclair's class to kick us off. What do you guys think of when you think of the deep sea? You can just yell it out.
It's very dark.
Very dark.
Exactly. Okay, great. That's 1. So it's extremely dark. Once you go down about 400 meters into the sea, there is no sunlight, none whatsoever. Right. What are the next 3?
1. Mr. Rootson's class, what do you guys think?
Austin, go ahead.
That there's fish.
Fish?
There are lots of fish. There are not just lots of fish, but there are lots of animals, as I'm going to tell you about in my presentation. That was not one of the things I was looking for, but hey, that's an extra bonus one. So 3 more I'm looking for.
All right, how about Miss DeMaio's class? What do you guys think? Any? Yeah? What was that?
You need oxygen.
Oxygen, okay.
Do you need oxygen? So let me ask, do you think it's really cold down there, or do you think it's really hot down there?
Really cold. Really cold.
Really cold, exactly. So temperatures in the deep sea tend to be just about freezing, just above, only a little bit warmer than freezing. So 2 more I'm looking for.
Okay. Miss Aitchison's class, what do you guys think? Let's get your mic. Oh, taking a second. So yeah, come on up, demute your mic, and we'll ask away.
Okay, go next.
That the lowest point in the ocean floor that has been discovered now is the Mariana Trench, which is like 10,000 feet down or something.
I mean, yes, exactly. So the deepest point in our oceans is in the Pacific at a place in the Mariana Trench called Challenger Deep. And it is over 10,000 meters, right? So that's like 3 times 10,000 feet. That's a really, really, really long way. But let me ask you guys, do you think there are really high pressures down there, or do you think it's really low pressures down there? High pressures, exactly. So when you go down into the deep sea, because there's so much water there, it causes there to be lots and lots of pressure. And so as a result, like for instance, if you, for every like 30 feet you go down in the sea, you gain the equivalent pressure to what we're feeling now. So something called an atmosphere of pressure. So if you go down to like 300 times what we're feeling now, 300 times, let me start again. 3 kilometers depth, I just get tongue-tied sometimes. 3 kilometers depth, it would be equivalent to 300 times the pressure we're feeling now. So that's a lot, right? And so finally, the last class, Jesse, you can choose. Do we think there's a lot of food in the deep sea or a little bit of food in the deep sea?
All right,
that's the question I want to throw to
Mr. Peters' class. What do you think? Lot or a little?
Food, a little bit of food. What do you think?
A little bit.
Little
a
bit.
little bit of food, exactly. So down in the deep sea, most of the food comes actually from the sea surface. So, we all know that there's so much sunlight at the sea surface, and that's why all the plankton are, all the fish are, and most of the life in the ocean is concentrated up there. But when they die, like whales, turtles, fish, plankton, they all, or a lot of them, drift down into the deep sea. And that's actually where most of the food comes from, in the deep ocean. And so because of that, there really isn't that much there. So to wrap up, basically, we've got, it's cold, it's dark, really high pressures, and not a lot of food. So really, it's not a very easy place to live. So I want you guys to remember that. So let's start the presentation. Okay, let me see if I can get this to work.
While you're getting that up too, I want to say that one of the YouTube classes wrote dark, cold, tube worms, vents, and mid-ocean ridge, which I love as a group of answers.
I mean, those are great answers. Wait, okay, so what are you seeing now?
Right now, you actually had it before. So right now you get your whole
Okay,
slide.
wait.
Oh, you're entirely back to you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Hold on.
We'll get there.
Right. Okay. Oh, God. This is like confounding. Bear with me.
We can solve problems in the deep sea, but can we figure out Zoom together?
I know, right? Just basic computer issues. Okay, what about now?
Now you're good. Go for it.
Yay! Okay, great. So, as Jesse said, I'm a deep sea biologist. I grew up in the Caribbean, but I'm currently based in London at the Natural History Museum there. And really, the Caribbean is not like, I'm sure, where you guys live. It's pretty hot most of the time. There are lots of beaches. And I grew up surrounded by water, by the sea. And so that meant that, becoming a marine biologist was kind of an easy decision. But as I got older, I kind of realized that there were so many questions that I couldn't answer about the ocean, especially the deep ocean. And so I decided that, hey, that would be perhaps a really cool place to study. And I'll tell you a lot of reasons for why that is now. So my research concentrates, as Jesse said, on trying to, oh, wait, bear with me. Oh, no. How do I get the sound off of a video?
We can't hear the sound anyway.
Oh, okay. Did you not just hear that sound?
We should know.
Okay, fab. That's great. That's exactly what I wanted. It's like the tech is just not me today. Okay. So, as Jesse said, my research concentrates on trying to answer 2 questions. First, for a lot of the deep sea, because we've never explored it, we actually don't even know what lives there, okay? And then the second thing is, because we don't know what lives there, we humans are impacting it already. Like, for instance, how we're impacting the land and in shallow waters, that is the same for the deep sea. And so my work is trying to understand how we're impacting the deep sea, and then trying to come up with ways that we can potentially fix it. So I study the big sort of fun animals that you don't need a microscope to look at, things you can see in pictures and videos. And I really, really feel very lucky to do what I do. There are very few careers that allow you to be amongst the first people on the planet to see something. And as a result, you know, it just is a very humbling feeling when you make discoveries, which happens almost every single time we venture down into the deep sea. And so the reason I wanted to show you guys this quick video was that to explain that to do my research, I get to go actually down into the deep sea sometimes using what you can see here. This is called a submersible. And it's a type of sort of submarine. And it's basically our sort of car down into the deep ocean. And so for between 1 and 3 months of the year, I spend time on ships like that you just saw out in the middle of the ocean, studying parts of the ocean that people have never explored before. And it's really, really exciting. We get to use cool tools, we get to see cool things, and we get to answer questions that nobody has answered before. So when I talk about the deep sea, what exactly do I mean? Well, most of the deep sea is everything that is deeper than 200 meters. So that's about 600 feet depth. And that's everything that is dark blue on this map. So you can see that is a huge amount of our world, right? In fact, the deep sea occupies over 60% of the Earth's surface and provides over 96% of all the space for animals and plants and other forms of life to live in on our planet. And that makes it really our largest ecosystem by far. But for most of the deep sea, as I said already, it's really, really unexplored. Actually, over 99% of it has never been seen by the human eye or using a camera. And so that means that for most of our planet, we just don't know what's there. We have better maps of the moon, of Mars, and of Venus than we do our own seafloor. And that's just a pretty crazy fact, isn't it? So most of the deep sea was thought to look a lot like this picture. So this was taken at about 4,000 meters, so 4 kilometers down in the deep sea. And this is in the North Atlantic, right? And this is basically, looks pretty boring. There's not a lot of life. Yes, there's this little sea urchin you can see in the front, but really there's not much else. There's a lot of sediment and it just doesn't look like such a fun place. But actually, that's because it's a hard place to live. As you heard, low temperatures, high pressures, not a lot of food, and also no light. And so it means that life is really difficult, but life always finds a way, right? So even though some of the deep sea looks like this, a lot of it looks like this. So we see lots of different habitats. So just like on land, how you have savannas and rainforests and deserts, just like that, we have different habitats down in the deep sea. So there are things like coral gardens, which we often call rainforests of the deep, down in the deep sea on mountains under the sea that we call seamounts. And so these are some pictures taken close to the Mariana Trench in 2016 on an expedition that I led. And you can see it's just really beautiful colors, really, really stunning habitats. And not only do we have coral gardens, but also, turn this volume down. Also, there are things like hydrothermal vents. So those are really, really fantastic places in the sea, in the deep sea. They're found only in the deep sea, where super hot, chemical-rich fluid gushes from the seafloor. And that's what you can see here and looks almost like smoke. But it's not smoke, it's just super hot water that's full of metals. And when it comes out of the seafloor, it forms these chimney-like structures. And those fluids actually power the ecosystems, and lots of animals come to live in these really extraordinary habitats. In fact, some of these animals like the ones you're seeing here in this video, actually use, instead of using light like plants do to create food. Instead, this entire ecosystem runs on chemical energy rather than light energy, and it's something called chemosynthesis. And that's actually what powers many of these ecosystems and gives many of these animals food. And then we have other deep sea habitats like food falls. So that's like what we were talking about at the beginning, when a lot of the food comes from the sea surface, and yes, you get little bits of plankton that rain down and is something we call marine snow because it looks like snow in the ocean. But then you also get much bigger packages of food. So things like whales and trees, manta rays, turtles. So when they die and sink down into the deep sea, they actually become sort of these feasts. It's like Thanksgiving, right? Like your family from around the country all flock to this massive whale carcass to basically eat all of the flesh, because really these kinds of feeding opportunities are very, very rare, and many of the animals want to make the most of it. And so you can see this picture in the top right was a fresh whale body that came down to the seafloor off California and is being eaten by those eel-like things. They're called hagfish. They're a special deep sea fish that are able to tie themselves into knots and create their own slime. I mean, it's like something from a horror movie. And then the picture in the bottom right is the same whale that was taken several months later, and you can see that all of the flesh is gone. And now we're looking at the whale vertebral column, so the spine of the whale there, as well as some ribs. And really every bit of the whale over time will be used, not just the flesh, but also the bones will be eaten. And then also it can form a habitat, like animals will come and live on the bones and shelter in the bones. Really, animals come from far and wide to use it for quite a long time. And the same can be said for trees, which you can see an example of in the bottom left. And there aren't just, hydrothermal vents and food falls and coral gardens on seamounts. There are also lots of other habitats like canyons, trenches, lakes at the bottom of the ocean called brine pools, cold seeps. I mean, really, there is just a huge range of habitats down there. So how do we study what we do down in the deep sea? Well, you saw that little video already, and that sort of tells you about the submersibles, which we'll talk a little bit about again in a second. But sometimes we don't go down ourselves into the deep sea because actually it's very time consuming. And while it's not dangerous, it's just not as efficient. And so oftentimes we use these. They're called remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. And they're basically robots that we send down into the deep sea. This one is about the size of a car, and they are able to go down to the deep sea. We control them from the ship. They have arms. You can see 2 arms on the front of that one, as well as lots of cameras and sensors. And they also have 2 baskets you can see on the front that we're able to put samples in. So the arms can pick up samples, whether it is a biology sample like an animal or a rock, put them into the baskets. We close the baskets, and then we can use it to tell things like temperature, salinity, oxygen content, and so on, as well as get really great imagery. And so really, these are sort of our workhorses. We use them all the time in deep sea science. But then also we use the much more exciting submersibles and ships. And so this was the ship that you saw in the video, the Alusha. And this is one of the submersibles that they have on board. And so really, while submersible use is a lot rarer now, it is still a really, really exciting tool to use because it gives us researchers the chance to actually go down there and see everything with our own eyes, which is an absolutely incredible experience. But, these ships are like working sort of, it's like a building at sea, right? There will be, because we go out to sea for a month at a time, usually, it means we need to take everything. Like you can't just pop to the grocery. So we take lots and lots of food, all the equipment we might need, things to keep us occupied in case there's a storm and we're not allowed to do work. We'll take movies and music and lots of other things. But these ships can hold about 50 to 60 people. They'll have a gym. They'll have people who cook all the food, people who drive the ships, engineers who keep the ship working, people who drive the submersibles. There'll be scientists. There'll be sometimes photographers or videographers. Really, there's a huge mix of people that can be out at sea working on these vessels. So why is the deep sea important? Why should we really care about it? I mean, many of us will never go there and it's kind of far away, right? Well, as you heard, it's the largest ecosystem on the planet. And so it plays a really big role in keeping our planet essentially healthy and keeping us alive. How does it do that? Well, it does things like cycle nutrients in our oceans so that they keep functioning the way they should. It removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as well as heat. And that's crucially important to keeping the temperature of our planet where it is right now. And especially important given the huge changes in temperature and the onset of climate change that we're seeing as well. The deep sea also plays a role in detoxifying our oceans. So a lot of the bad stuff from the shallows will end up down in the deep sometimes and be locked away. And then more and more, because in shallow waters and in the deep ocean and on land, we are running out of resources we might need. We are now looking to the deep sea for them. So things like fishing. Fishing has happened in the deep sea for decades, and it's a place that we get food from. I'm sure many of you in the room probably have eaten deep sea fish and haven't actually realized. Then there's things like oil and gas. We use it to power our economies, and a lot of it comes from the deep sea. Then now there's potentially the onset of deep sea mining, a place that we potentially might get minerals or metals from in the future. And then medicine. One of the best treatments against breast cancer is from a marine sponge, a sponge found in the ocean. And so with that in mind, now we're looking to the deep sea to think, hey, what useful medicine and antibiotics and other types of treatments might there be that can help us in the future? Really, the deep sea could potentially provide us with a lot of really useful things that could help to solve a lot of challenges that humanity will face in the future. And then, of course, working in the deep sea means that new technology is being developed all the time. For instance, there are some sponges that are made of glass. Yes, glass sponges. I encourage you to Google that after. That actually have provided inspiration for more efficient internet cables. Okay, so those are some of the inventions and discoveries that are coming about because of deep sea research. And ultimately, I want you, if you remember one thing from this presentation, from this event, is that our planet cannot be healthy unless we have a healthy ocean and a healthy deep ocean. So I wanted to sort of focus, as you heard, because there are so many habitats in the deep sea, it means there's lots and lots and lots of different animals. Like, it's thought that there are 1 million species in our oceans, and over 2/3 of those we haven't even discovered yet. That's crazy, right? Think about how much there is left to discover in the oceans. So I thought I'd wrap up by telling you about my 4 favorite deep sea animals that I've seen during my exploration. And these are just, some of the crazy deep sea animals out there. And actually, while we're talking about glass sponges, this animal in the center of the screen is one of those glass sponges. Right, so my 4 favorite deep sea animals. Let's go. So we have first up the giant isopod. These are one of my favorites. They're a little bit scary looking, a little bit creepy, but I think they're really cute and remind me to show you my stuffed toy at the end. So these are kind of like roly-polies. If you go into the forest and look in a dead log, I'm sure you'll find something called a roly-poly. And this is the marine deep sea version. But what is cool about these is that they are giant. Like, I'm talking over 1 foot long, okay? And they are one of the most important scavengers in the deep sea. They will eat basically anything, we think, that lands up in the deep sea dead. And they play a really, really important role. And just, they look adorable when they swim. I think they're super cool. So that's number 4. Number 3. Oh no, the sound is on again. Let's put this down. Right, number 3. This is Casper, the octopus. It's been nicknamed Casper because it's obviously white and pretty friendly looking, like Casper the Ghost. But this was discovered off Hawaii a couple of years ago, and it was found at a depth of nearly 3 miles. Okay, so this is deep. And this is a new species, and it still doesn't have a name, even though it was discovered a few years ago, because we didn't collect it. And so one of the rules of science is that you have to collect something to be able to properly analyze it, to call it a new species and give it a name. Let's play that again while I'm talking. So this one still doesn't even have a name yet, right? So if any of you feel like being deep sea biologists and describing octopus, giving it names, it's a pretty good career choice. But what is special about this octopus is that it's really the deepest of this type of octopus. So most octopus in the deep sea are nicknamed Dumbo octopus, and that's because they have these really big flaps on the side of their heads that are like, they are fins, and they use them to swim. So they look like Dumbo the elephant. But this one, you can see, doesn't have those flaps. And so there's something called inserate octopus. And so usually they're found much, much shallower, but this is not just a new species, not just a new genus, which is an even bigger category of new species, but it's also the deepest octopus ever found without the fins. So pretty extraordinary discovery. Then we have my second favorite is the Yeti crab. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. This is a blind white crab. They are found at hydrothermal vents like those you saw videos of earlier. And they're found at hydrothermal vents only close to Antarctica that we know of, right? So in the Southern Ocean and perhaps a little in the Indian Ocean as well. And these are really special. You can see they're found at these hydrothermal vents in the, thousands upon thousands upon thousands, like this picture you're seeing here. They're just piled on top of each other, trying to get close to that warm chemical-rich fluid from the hydrothermal vent. But they're really cool, and they're called Yeti crabs because they are furry or hairy. So you can see the picture at the top. On the underside of the Yeti crab, on its chest and on the undersides of its arms, there are lots and lots of hairs. And so it uses these hairs to grow bacteria, like a farm, right? It has arm farms, and it farms the bacteria on its arms and its chest, and then it eats the bacteria. So it scoops it off and puts it into its mouth. And that is how this Yeti crab lives. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I eat a lot of food, and I would happily have a farm on my body that I could eat from. It just makes life so much simpler. So my favorite deep sea animal is the long-nosed chimaera. I just love these. They are the cutest. They're also called ratfish or rabbitfish or spookfish. And they are a type of, well, they're related rather to sharks and rays. And this one was photographed, and we saw a lot of them in the Gulf of Mexico last year, so close to some of you guys. And really, they're just adorable. They use that big long nose as sort of a, what's the right word? As sort of a sensor to pick up animals that they could eat, prey that they could eat in the seafloor using electrical charges. And you can see they also have a spike on the top of their fin. So on their dorsal fin, you can see there's a spike there, and those are known to be venomous. And generally, they're just amazing. Look at his little eyes or big eyes. They're pretty big eyes. And long nose. They're just the best. Anyway, so I hope I've convinced you that the deep sea isn't scary and is actually pretty cool and home to lots of really cool animals. And most importantly, it is important. The deep ocean is important to keeping our planet healthy and keeping us alive. So thank you for having me, and thank you to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants for organizing this. So happy to take questions and introduce you to my giant isopod that I have in my office.
Yes, you'll have to go get it. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Amon. That was fantastic as always. In addition to our 6 classes live, we've got 3 groups joining from Charleston, South Carolina, Canada, Ontario, and Freehold, New Jersey on YouTube. So if you guys want to type in some more questions, I'll take as many as I can from there as well. But to kick us off, let's begin with a question from Miss Denica's class. If you guys want to, Oh, there it is. There's a giant.
I'll just answer the questions with it.
Perfect.
Like,
Okay.
like it's going to help me.
Perfect.
But for the record, this is almost the real size of giant isopods. It's a little bit bigger, but you can see these are pretty big animals. It's almost like a pet dog, right?
The world's scariest pet dog. All right. Ms. Denica's class, if you guys want to kick us off with a question, come on up.
Anybody? Anyone have a question? Go ahead, Ryan. Loud.
Have you ever explored a coral reef?
I have explored coral reefs, and interestingly, most of the world's corals are found in the deep sea. So I know when you've probably been on holiday, you've seen these snorkeled on these lovely coral reefs, but actually most of them are in the deep sea. And there are some really, really big ones and some really cool corals down in the deep ocean. So yeah, lots of coral reefs.
Very cool. All right. Let's take a question from Mr. Peters's class. If you guys want to come on up.
Come on up.
How far have you ever went down?
Yeah.
That's a good question. So I think I've been down about 10 times now. And that's 10 times in 10 years. So it's really not very common anymore. But the deepest I've been is 2.5 kilometers, which is like 1.5 miles, I guess. And that was in the Cayman Trench in the Caribbean in a Japanese submersible called the Shinkai 6500. It was a very bizarre experience, but I will say that sometimes you're in there for like 9 hours at a time, right? Like from when you get in to when you get out, and there's no toilet on board. So just think about that.
Yeah. I like how one kid just plunged her head into her hands. Thank you for that. All right, let's go. That was an awesome answer. By the way, I want to stress to our classes, I mean, Dr. Amon's made it seem sort of natural to go in a submersible. Maybe in human history, the low thousands of people have been in a submersible, might even be high hundreds. So very, very few people in history have ever had this opportunity. So it's really fantastic that you've had the chance to go down 10 times. How cool.
And a great time to point out that, you know, there have been so many astronauts, so many people that have gone into space, like hundreds, if not, I think thousands. Yeah. But actually, only 4 people have ever been to the deepest point on the planet, which we heard earlier is in the Mariana Trench, Challenger Deep. Only 4 have been down, and they've all been men so far. So hey, ladies, we got work to do.
For quick follow-up on that, Don Walsh and Picard together. James Cameron went down in his vessel. Who's the 4th?
The 4th one was last year. It was an American billionaire called Victor Vescovo, and he was doing this program called the 5 Deeps, which went to the deepest points of all 5 oceans.
As one does. All right. Okay, Miss DeMaio's class, if you guys want to come up for a question, go for it.
What's the biggest sea creature you've ever seen?
Ooh, good question. Well, if we're talking about in the shallow waters, it'll probably be some type of whale, maybe a humpback whale. Seen lots of those when I went to the Antarctic. But in the deep sea, biggest creature I've ever seen, ooh, I'll give you 2 answers. One was a giant shark called, they're basically, it's not giant, but it's really big, called a 6-gill shark. And they can get up to like 12 feet long, sometimes bigger. They can be really, really big, and they have 6 gills, and they mostly live in the deep sea. Super, super cool. And then also, you don't really think of these things, but actually there are some sponges. So deep sea sponges, some of them can be the size of cars and bigger. Well, there's been one that's been seen to be the size of the car. And because it's such a big size, we actually think it might also be really, really old, like thousands of years old, right? So yeah, lots of really big old animals in the deep sea.
Very cool. You also mentioned glass sponges earlier, so I will share with all the classes when we're done a picture of glass sponges. They're one of the most beautiful things in the entire world. Mm-hmm. I want to pass along a question from a group on YouTube. So Ms. Burgos's class has a question we've never got before, which I love. Are there any programs that would consider an international ocean station like the International Space Station in deep ocean areas?
So that is an excellent question. And actually, it's something that is now finally being talked about. Yes, we have, like stations where in shallow waters where people can go to live. I think there's only 1 or 2 operating now, but there's nothing like that for the deep sea. And it's not necessarily a place that, humans might go and live, but it could be a place that, scientists are able to go to. It's always operating. It's always perhaps streaming video from the deep sea. It's a place that scientists can sort of log into to get a different view of the deep sea, a constant view of the deep sea. And really, we can sort of work globally to figure out these big questions that exist in the deep sea. And finally, this is something that's being talked about as maybe a potential. Next year, the UN Decade of Ocean Science is beginning. And one of the main focuses is the deep ocean, given that we know so little about it. And that could potentially be a great solution to answering many of those questions.
Outstanding. All right. Let's go to Harrisonburg, Mr. Rutzen's class. You guys have one? Come on up.
Have you ever swam with a shark?
Yeah.
I have swam with sharks. That's always in the shallow waters because you can't swim in the deep sea, right? If I were to get out of the submersible in deep sea, I would immediately die. That's because I'd be squished, right? But in shallow waters, yes, I've swum with lots of different sharks. I think probably like 6 or 7 or 8 species maybe. And in the deep sea, we often see lots of species of sharks as well.
Super cool. All right. Mr. Sinclair's class, if you guys want to come up, go for it.
What's the smallest sea creature you've ever seen?
Oh, so in the deep sea, that's 2 really good questions. So in the deep sea, we get lots of giant animals like this giant isopod, right? Like there's a lot of gigantism where animals grow to really big sizes. Giant isopods, giant squids, other things like that. But also, on the contrary, we get lots of animals that are like dwarfs. There's a lot of dwarfism in the deep sea. So really, really small animals. And most of the life in the deep sea is actually really, really small. Like in that picture I showed you with the sediment that looked quite boring, there would actually be probably hundreds of animals living in that sediment that would be very, very, very small. And that's what most are. I think the most common animal in the deep sea is probably like lots and lots of little deep sea worms that live in those sediments. Yeah. There's so many of them. And most of them, as we said, new species, never seen before. Just lots of work to do.
This is something that I always love that we harp on when we talk about deep sea biology and tropical rainforest too, is that there's so much left to find. So if you guys are coming up and you want to become a scientist, every time you go to these habitats, you find new creatures that are new to science, totally unique, possibly sponges that have cures to breast cancer in them. Like, I mean, they're really fantastic creatures. So I'm glad we're highlighting that so deeply. All right, Ms. Aitchison's class, if you guys want to come up, and then we'll do a whole other round of questions as we're whipping through these.
Go ahead.
What is the most threatening to the sea?
Yeah.
What's the most threatening thing to the sea?
Yeah.
That is a really good question. So I'd say generally for the ocean and the planet has to be climate change. Climate change is such a big one now. It's impacting our entire planet, and really it's doing it in a big way. And so what's happening in the ocean because of climate change is that it's heating up, right? Getting much, much warmer. And because it's getting warmer, it's losing its oxygen. And so that means that lots of animals in the sea, as we heard from someone at the beginning of this conversation, animals need oxygen in the deep sea and in the oceans. And so if we lose some of that oxygen, it means that less and less animals will be able to survive. And so not only do we have deoxygenation and warming, but then we're also seeing acidification. So the water is turning a little bit acidic. And so that means it's also making it much, much harder for animals to live in our oceans. So those 3 things, but also, I mean, we see lots of pollution, not just things like plastic. I mean, on every single expedition I've been on, I've seen our trash, from, dolls to plastic bags to fridges. We find it in the deep sea, whatever it is. And so really, it's not just about the things we can see, but also things like chemicals and the tiny pieces of plastic that break down. There's a lot that, even though the deep sea is far from our reach and in places that people have never been, it doesn't mean that our impacts aren't there already.
Right. Excellent answer. Great question. Really glad we got that one in. Miss Pettigrew is grade 5s in Charleston, South Carolina. Wanted to ask, what kind of education did you need to become a deep sea biologist?
Good question. So firstly, if you want to work in the deep sea, you don't have to be a biologist, obviously. You can be a geologist to study the rocks, a chemist, but obviously biology is the best because you get to study the animals. But so you definitely need sciences. If biology, if you like the natural world, you need biology, chemistry helps, but really a good basis in science. But what I would say before is that, you know, just read everything you can about the ocean. Like, you guys have grown up with so many resources that are just amazing. The internet is an amazing place to find information. And before I forget, there are a couple ships that stream their deep sea exploration live on the internet. And so all you need to do is click on the website and you'll be able to watch the deep ocean, their exploration. You'll be able to hear the scientists, you'll be able to see the discoveries being made. And sometimes you can even type in questions to ask the scientists on board. So those are called the Nautilus, the Oceanus Explorer, and the Falcor. I'm sure Jesse might be able to give you those after. They're not streaming right now, but later this year they will be, and they are actually amazing to watch. Like, just the best. You can see so many incredible things. But also, and the last thing is that to get on these ships, you don't have to do science. As I said, there's chefs, there's engineers, there's boat drivers, there's captains. Really, there are a lot of different avenues to get onto these deep sea vessels where you get to experience a lot of the fun and the discoveries, even if science really isn't your thing.
Fantastic. And yes, we've done sessions with all 3 of those ships before, but they are doing things independently as well. So you can check those out on our YouTube channel and beyond, and I will share them when we're done. All right, let's dive back through. We've got a little bit of time. If anyone needs to go, just type and let me know, and I'll come to you guys first. But to begin, we'll start with Miss Denica's class. And if you guys want to come up for a second question, go for it.
How many crabs does it? Sorry. How many crabs does a lake have?
How many what?
How many crabs does a lake have?
How many different kinds of crabs have you found?
Yeah. Okay.
Ooh. So we see lots and lots of different types of crabs on all of our expeditions. They live in the deep sea and they're pretty common. And actually, a lot of them tend to live around corals, interestingly, and in corals. And a cool story is that there are some species of, well, they're not quite crabs, they're more lobsters, but there are some species that live only in a particular type of coral. And they are thought to live only in that one coral their entire lives. So it's like if you lived your entire life in the house you live in right now. That's what these crabs are like. And lobsters, they live their entire life in this sort of relationship with this coral, which is pretty cool. But lots of different species of crabs and lobsters. And actually, I've only described one, but I've described one species of lobster so far that we found off South Africa, and it's white.
Sorry, that answers the question we got on YouTube about if you found species, so you found several.
So yeah, so I don't actually know what the number is now, but I've discovered lots of different species of worm as well as crabs, and I'm currently, lobsters, and I'm currently working on my first coral. Oh, and sponges, but I'm currently working on my first coral.
Awesome. All right, back to Whitney, back to Mr. Petrus's class. If you guys have a second question, come on up.
Are you planning any more trips or dives or more research anytime in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple things in the pipe works. So this year I may be going to the Caribbean to look for deep sea sharks and other deep sea environments. So that could be pretty cool in September. But next year I'm going to be on 1 or potentially 2 research cruises where we're going to go off Costa Rica, which is in Central America, and we're going to look for these octopus sort of like nurseries. It's where there are thousands and thousands of these cute purple octopus that live all in this one area, and they lay their eggs and they sit in this area with their eggs for a very long period of time. And so we're going to be doing that, and it's all going to be streamed live on the internet next year. So I know it's a long way away, but it's going to be pretty cool, so you should tune in.
Awesome. Very cool. Joe actually got a chance to go on the Nautilus last year, and they found an octopus garden, which was really neat. So this is something
Yeah, so
just
were they,
discovered.
so they were either the ones off California or Costa Rica, but we're going to the Costa Rica ones
Yeah.
on the Schmidt boat, the Falco.
Excellent. All right. Miss DeMaio's class, if you guys have another question, come on up. I love all the hands being up in a class. It's awesome.
Have you ever been in a shark cage?
Oh, I have not, but actually it is something that is on my bucket list. I've done lots of scuba diving with sharks, not in the cage, but I would love to do scuba diving with great white sharks in the cage. That's one of my life dreams.
Very cool. We are getting more questions on YouTube than we could possibly answer, so I love, I love the enthusiasm of the teachers. I do want to pass along one more from a teacher we haven't had yet. So Miss O'Halloran's class, they asked what was your research next, and you sort of told us that you're going to be going to this Costa Rica deep sea garden. Is there something that you really want to research that you haven't researched yet, like a place or a thing that you're really keen on that you haven't explored?
Yeah, so because I'm from the Caribbean, there's been very little work done down there. And that's because a lot of the countries in the Caribbean can't actually afford the ships and the submersibles and all that expensive equipment you need to do the deep sea research. So it's my dream to basically be able to do that in the Caribbean and slowly make my way through the Caribbean with a great team of people exploring what habitats are there, what species are there. Undoubtedly, there'll be hundreds, if not thousands of new species. And then being able to say, hey, some of these places are really important. We should protect them.
Outstanding. All right. Let's go to Harrisonburg again. Scripton's class. Go for it, guys.
Isla, go ahead and say yours.
What is the most interesting deep sea animal you have found?
The most interesting animal you've ever seen?
Yes.
Yeah. No pressure.
That's a hard question. I mean, I talked about my favorite ones, but I'll tell you about another one. So there is a deep sea worm called the bone-eating zombie worm, also known as Osedax. And this worm lives only on the bones of dead whales. So pretty specific habitat. And so what it does is, if you Google it, it looks kind of like a coconut tree, right? It's got this root structure like a coconut tree does. And then it's got a sort of a trunk. And then like coconut trees have those branches with leaves, it's got these pink or red palps that then have lots of sort of leaves, but they're not leaves. They're like basically other kinds of palps on them. And so what they do is they use that root structure to burrow down into the bone, like a tree burrows down into the soil, and then it sucks out the nutrients from those whale bones. And that is how those worms live. I mean, it's genius.
Well, hey, earlier you said you wanted a farm on your body, so you know the whole world's up here.
Everyone's basically concluding I'm really weird. I'm not really weird. I just like the deep sea.
All right, well, we'll watch the transcript later. By the way, before we take our last two from live classes, I want to note there's been a side discussion on where you can get a stuffed isopod. So there are tons. You can find them on Amazon. And if any class gets one, please send us an email showing us that you have one, because I'd love to see that. All right, Mr. Sinclair's class, and then we'll wrap up a second after with Ms. Aitchison's. So Mr. Sinclair, come on up, guys.
What is the scariest animal that you've ever seen?
Ooh.
Scariest animal. That is a hard one. I will say, while I don't think there are that many really scary animals, I think most of them are really beautiful and cool most of the time. But I have to say, I just don't like being surprised, right? When I'm in the ocean, I just don't like things suddenly popping out of somewhere at me. And there have been many times, whether it is a crab I've stepped on in the sand that's totally freaked me out, or when you're sort of diving and then you look into like this hole and there's like a big sort of fish in there looking out at you. I just don't generally like things like that. I've been in lots of scary experiences, but really, I wouldn't say any of them are because of actually, let me change that answer. So I was in the Solomon Islands earlier this year, which is in the Pacific Ocean. Look it up when you're done. And just before, every morning I used to leave the boat and go for a swim, right? And sometimes a stand-up paddle board, right? Like when you stand on the board. And I went out, as I usually did that morning, and went around by myself, tootled around this little island that was there. And then I came back to the boat maybe an hour later. And just after I'd gotten back to the boat and was sitting on the deck, right, just like maybe 40 feet from the ship, a saltwater crocodile swam by right to the island that I was just swimming around. And saltwater crocodiles, if you don't know, are one of the most dangerous animals in the ocean. They are scary. So, you know, different time, that could have ended completely differently and I wouldn't be here with you today. But it was all fine. It was just very scary and sort of a wake-up call that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be swimming in that area.
We're glad you made it. We're very happy. We've actually never done a presentation on saltwater crocodiles. That's a good reminder. We gotta do that.
Yeah.
All right, we'll wrap it up. We're over time with Miss Aitchison's class. If you guys want to end us off, just come up, demute your mic, and then you're good to go.
You're good, Cole. Do fish reproduce different in the deep sea?
Oh, good question. Okay, quick story. So in the deep sea, because it's dark and cold and there's not as much life as in shallow waters, it means it's really hard to find a mate sometimes, especially for fish. So deep sea anglerfish, I'm sure many of you have heard about them. They have the little lure that lights up. They have a really interesting way of reproducing. Quick story. I know we don't have that much time, Jesse. So what happens is,
it's a great story.
It's a great story. So the females are quite big. They can be anything from this size to sort of this size, right? Depending on the species. But the males are actually teeny tiny, way, way smaller than the females, right? Like really small. And so what happens is the male is swimming around looking for a mate. And because it's dark, he has really big nostrils. And he uses those really big nostrils to smell out any females that might be close by. And when he smells a female, he swims up to her and bites onto her side, the side of her body. And when that happens, it triggers this reaction in his body. And his lips fuse to the side of her body. And that means they're then fused together for life. Okay. And slowly over time, their blood systems fuse and they become one animal, or more or less. And the male spends the rest of his life attached to the side of the female, basically reproducing with her when she needs. It's just a crazy story, but that's sometimes how reproduction happens in the deep sea.
I'm so glad we ended with that. And also, I think we should have Mr. Sinclair's students like in the background of all the videos just for your reactions. You guys are awesome. So thank you for that. It's such a cool story and such a unique example of how cool the deep sea is. Dr. Amon, before we wrap up, is there any last thing you want to share with kids about how they can learn? Like, I'm going to pass along all your social media, your website, Nautilus, all the things we've talked about today. Is there something you can recommend to kids that want to learn more about the deep sea personally? What can they go do right now when they're done?
Ooh. Because none of those ships are streaming right now, it means you can't go watch those. But 2 websites. If you go on to NOAA's, so a lot of you American schools should know what NOAA is, NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, their website, they have incredible videos. A lot of the videos I've used today are from them, and they have a lot of them have explanations. They are a great resource. And the other place is MBARI, so MBARI. Their Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, they basically have an incredible social media, incredible, whether you use Instagram or Facebook or something else, Twitter, they just have the coolest content, and I do recommend having a look there.
Awesome. So I'll pass along those resources too. One last note I always like to share with kids: once you're 10 years old, you can get your scuba license. So it's not going down a submersible, but it's a way of exploring the deep sea in a really fantastic way. I think every class we have today are 10 or really close to being 10. Do that. It's like the best thing you'll ever get a chance to do. Thank you for nodding your head, Dr. Amon.
That's how I started. Seriously, I got it when I was 15 and I wish I'd done it earlier.
Awesome. All right. At the end of every session, as you guys know what we do, I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. And so boys and girls, if you guys could join me in saying a huge thank you to Dr. Amon for joining us today. You are all demuted. Go for it.
Thank you.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, one got there. They got their mic working. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Awesome. We really appreciate you joining us for Epic Earth and for Dr. Amon's presentation. Please go get a stuffed isopod because why not? And look for those resources when we're done. Dr. Amon, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks.
All right. Have a wonderful